Hello and welcome to this video for today, whether you're here for the first time or you're returning. Hope you will enjoy. Hey there guys, how's it going today? Getting into this one here today, and I'm talking about the term, basically what does it mean for uh, my deck's doing its own thing. So what is meant by that, statement or that sort of ethos of when you're building your deck, you say, my deck's doing its own thing. For the most part, what that means, because I use this term a fair bit, I say this a lot, my deck's doing its own thing, rah rah. So don't worry about it, or whatever, it's sometimes one of those things that it can mean one or two things. Mostly, it means that you're not really running a lot of cards that are quote unquote hate cards or stacks cards or whatnot. These sorts of cards that some people play that basically affect all the players in the game, slow the game down, not really pillow fort, but sort of pillow fort style cards that just sort of deny people resources and deny people doing certain game actions and whatnot. Now, rules and rules reset sort of cards and whatnot, they're okay and whatnot to some extent. Sometimes, especially with tutoring, I think, but especially if it's non-land. If it's non-land, then I'm probably fine with it. But lands, that's one thing. But again, it's one of those things where I understand, why some people feel a little bit irksome when somebody's has 50 mana on turn 3 or something because they just got all their lands out, by continually searching their deck and whatnot. So I understand that, but it's not always like that. That's a very over exaggeration what I sort of said there as well. But again, that sort of thing does sort of happen, where somebody just ramps and ramps and ramps and ramps and ramps, and then suddenly they have, a whole bunch of lands out, and they most basically have almost all their lands out, and everyone else is just sort of going, wow, this is really gross, this person's way ahead of the rest of us, and whatnot, that sort of thing. So some people feel the need, and I understand when you're not playing green or whatnot, that it's very much like this, you feel very bad not having access to be able to all of the mana in the world or whatnot, like some of the green decks seem to do sometimes, because I've played those decks and it feels miserable to be sitting there going, oh, I only have 2 lands and I've missed my 3rd land drop 8 times, but yeah, I'm a threat over here, guys, and whatnot. Again, sometimes it just that happens, but that's deck variance as well. But again, when you're saying, I want to get back to what I'm mainly talking about here, which is my deck's doing its own thing. That means that for the most part, you're running limited interactive cards. So cards that don't really affect too many people, like Blood Moon or whatnot, these sorts of cards, Back to Basics, these sorts of different cards as well, sort of fit into this area, Magus of the Moon, different cards like that. So basically locking people out of playing, their colors and whatnot, locking people out of being able to untap lands, locking people out of being able to activate their mana rocks and whatnot, things like this, or activate their artifacts or whatnot, whatever, or enter the battlefield effects don't trigger, or things like this, just like various stacks or lock pieces that, hate people out of the game for, whatever sort of strategy, or, green spells can't be cast, or whatever, things like that, or whatever, black spells can't be cast, or whatever, things like that. So when you're playing a deck that is doing its own thing, that isn't saying that you don't have any removal or interaction whatsoever for the most part, but it's just saying that, well, what my deck is doing is trying to do what my deck is doing. My deck isn't really caring about what your deck is doing. Yes, I have some removal for cards that you will have in your deck, but I have a limited number of them, and I will only pick and choose the cards that I really don't want you to have for the most part to get rid of. I'm not stopping you from playing the game. I'm just removing the cards in which I feel are too much of an advantage for you to have, like saying Nyx Plumation. That's a really dangerous and powerful card for you to let somebody have. So you really shouldn't allow them to have that card for the most part. You should try to remove it. It's not saying, like somebody might say, well, like banishing light effects are just, another form of removal. Yeah, sure, but they're temporary. The same with anything that turns it into a land or turns it into a frog or turns it into whatever. Most of those are enchantment or aura-based type things, or artifact-based things for the most part. So again, they're temporary for the most part. Yes, again, the player who has their thing enchanted or whatever might not have the removal, or might not want to use the removal on that artifact or that enchantment or whatever, specifically because, again, they might be like, well, it's not that problematic that my Nyx Plumation got turned into a land. I wanted to use it for mana or whatever, but it is problematic if I can't use it in any way. But again, it is to say, well, of course, that if it is removed, killed, exiled, whatever, of course they can't use it. That is the same thing in that sense. So, giving them something, that slight downside of, you're giving them something to utilize, might be worth it to say, well, you've gotten rid of the thing that was the most important thing for right now. Maybe they'll be able to get it back later. But again, for the most part, you've gotten rid of it, the thing for now. But again, you're not stopping that person from playing the game. You're not saying, okay, cool, I'm going to stasis lock you, or I'm going to blood moon you because I'm just that kind of a person or I'm just going to pay Ponza and destroy all of your lands, or I'm just going to play the game in a very spiky way and just destroy every single one of your mana rocks or mana dorks or whatever. So that's just like, to me, again, like all counterspelling everything somebody does or whatever. That's not really a way to play the game, really, in my opinion, for the most part. Now, I know everyone has their own ways of playing the game, and everyone enjoys different parts of the strategy and the gameplay and whatnot, this sort of thing. Again, I understand that some people really like playing stacks or taxes or permission style decks. I don't understand why, but again, some people really enjoy like the whole puzzle of how do I get out of like playing this. But again, to me, it's one of those things that suddenly you're there for the next 6 hours trying to figure this out, and you've basically already lost anyway. So it's just one of those things that I don't really like playing against, and I know a lot of players don't really like playing against. But again, people do play these style of cards and these style of decks. I think if you have one stacks piece, you might as well be all in on stacks pieces, because again, where I was kind of going down stick to your theme. Like, if you have a random stacks piece in there, it's kind of like, well, what's it doing in there? Like, for the most part, it's not really doing anything. It's just an annoying card that everyone wants to get rid of, or they just want to get rid of you as quickly as possible to get rid of the thing that you've played. So again, when you're playing a deck that is on, quote unquote, on its own game plan, is another term that I will use. You're playing cards that help you, benefit you. You're not really caring, for the most part, what your opponents are doing. Another term that I've sort of seen people use for that, saying my deck's doing its own thing, is if somebody has a commander or commanders sometimes that are somewhat infamous or whatever, you know that most of the decks are a combo deck of some sort or are a very powerful deck of some sort for the most part. CDH sort of levels of power that you've seen around. This is typically a combo deck. Typically you do this or do that and whatnot and just combo off. Whatever. Again, those sorts of players will say, I'm doing my own thing, or my deck's doing its own thing to alleviate the minds of the other players, to say, hey, look, I'm actually just playing like Goblin Tribal or whatever, and it's in 5 colors, and I just so happen to have this card in my collection or whatever, and decided to use it as my commander because it gives my creatures haste or whatever. I'm playing Boar Tribal. I'm playing this. This is what I'm actually playing. I'm actually playing Thopter Tribal, or I'm playing this, or I'm playing this other thing, or I'm playing this other janky thing. I'm playing, ladies facing left, or I'm playing Chair Tribal, and he happens to be in a chair, or or people in chairs or whatever. This is what my deck's actually doing. That's another way that people alleviate, what their deck's actually doing by saying, hey, don't worry about what my commander is or whatnot, or whatever you've seen like other decks do with this commander or whatnot. My deck is Chair Tribal, or my deck is doing this. This is what my deck is doing. Rather than people expecting, oh, so this is a really powerful deck, is it? No, my deck's doing its own thing. My deck is a Chair Tribal deck or whatever, or it's a Rat Tribal deck or whatever it is. Mine's a I'm going to mill myself deck or whatever. And then I have one thing that says, or one or two things that say I win the game if I have no library or whatever. But I have to actually get back to my turn or whatnot for them to actually work. So again, you can sort of look at it in those two ways. So again, when you're saying my deck's doing its own thing, that doesn't mean that I'm not going to have some removal, maybe some counter spells or whatnot for some things. But again, it's not saying that I have got 50 counter spells or 60 counter spells and I'm going to counter every single spell that is played throughout the game because I don't want anyone else to play the game. I want to sit over here and play solitaire or whatnot. Or the same thing with stacks or tax or lockout style effects. I don't actually want the other players to play the game. I want to sit over here and play my game with solitaire and make you all watch. So, again, if you're saying my deck is doing its own thing, you're saying, hey, look, my deck isn't playing the game to lock people out of the game and do this sort of thing. My deck is just doing the things like I'm making zombies, I'm doing this, I'm making Thopters, or I'm, making beasts, or whatever it is, or I'm playing enchantments and I'm playing artifacts, and this is what my deck is doing. So your deck is more about what you're doing and has some interaction and some play with what your opponents are playing, like some amount of removal, board wipes, etc. Rather than just being a hate deck for the most part to stop your opponents down. Sure, like graveyard hate, that might sound like whatever, a thing to lock people out. But again, things like Bajuka Bog, or I can't remember the name, or I think it's called Scavenging Wastes or something, or whatever it is. The card that basically you pay a 4 mana for and you exile everyone's graveyards. Most of those effects are one-off effects. So you reset somebody back. It's the same as a board wipe for the most part with those players. Packing a little bit of graveyard hate isn't that bad. Packing a Scavenging Ooze perhaps is a bit too much, because it is a card that basically just says every turn I will get rid of most of your cards in your graveyard. You won't be able to play the game. I won't be progressing too far in the game, but you won't be progressing at all. That's another reason why I don't like cards like Aura Shards and cards like that, because basically it says, well, none of my opponents that are playing artifact or enchantment based decks can play the game, because as soon as I play a creature or a few creatures, all of their stuff is gone, and they're not going to play anything until the Aura Shards is gone. So it's just one of those things where I don't play cards that are too oppressive to the other players for the most part. So that's what is meant mainly by I'm doing my own thing. You're not playing oppressive cards that stop people from playing the game, or they can't really play the game in the way that their deck is meant to play. You're playing cards that can answer some of what they're doing, but it will only slow them down for the most part, so that you can further your game plan and try to win in your own way. But again, they will still be able to remove whatever you're doing, counter whatever you're doing, or slow you down in the same way sometimes, for the most part. So again, don't always assume that a deck is all on what it's doing, because even though I sort of said stick to what your theme is, a deck has to have answers. You can't just have no answers, because otherwise, you'll always find yourself in the position of going, well, I need to answer this, and just be not able to do it. So you need answers, but you can't just play the game and say, in my opinion, you can't just play the game and say, well, I'm going to sit over here and play solitaire and it's all fun for me, and then my opponents, don't get to do anything. This is a game, and everyone should be able to play it. So that's the point I want to make there. But anyway, I think I want to make some more of that sort of point a little bit more clearly and a little bit more in another video as well. So, let me know what you think about playing the game this way and whatnot. And if you've liked it, hope you'll come back for another one. If you would like to further support the channel, you can go onto our Patreon. You can also get social with us on our Facebook. To follow all the updates, make sure you hit the like button. And on our Discord, to get into it, please leave a comment and I'll send you an invite. All links are in the description. I hope you have enjoyed this video here today, and if you have, please consider liking, sharing and subscribing, and I hope you will come back for another one. See you then.